Greetings, all. This is 15 minutes or less with the professor. I am your host, Professor Keys, and I'm going to discuss ego defense mechanisms and the sweet science of boxing. I will make analogies between the execution of tactics and techniques of the sweet science of boxing and articulate analyses of the characteristics and dynamics of ego defense mechanisms during intellectual debates. I will read two essays. The first is The Sweet Science and Ego Defense Mechanisms, and the second is Counterpunching and Ego Defense Mechanisms. Lastly, I will read a dialogue I had with a person we will call anonymous that demonstrates what I described in the essay Counterpunching and Ego Defense Mechanisms. In tribute to the late great legendary boxing referee Mills Lane, let's get it on. Sweet science and ego defense mechanisms. Boxing is a sport, and sports involve competition. All contestants who want to achieve success must be competitive. All intellectual debates not part of an organized competition should not involve competition. However, on social media and in many instances in person, intellectual debates involve competition. An explanation for this is that competition is a value of capitalism. Citizens of the United States adopt capitalism's values through unconscious conditioning. This aspect of competition impacts the ego, resulting in too many people becoming competitive in intellectual debates outside of organized competition. Also, like the values of capitalism, ego defense mechanisms are adopted through unconscious conditioning. Moreover, ego defense mechanisms are instinctual, so you can't cure or stop them from happening. You must get familiar with the characteristics and dynamics so that when the instinct is triggered, you can quickly acknowledge what is happening and stop yourself. Boxing is a combat sport, which is referred to as the hurt business. Ambitious competitors of combat sports know that to be successful, they must have bad intentions for their opponents and be willing to hurt them. Intellectual debates should not be like combat sports, where the objective is to have bad intentions for your opposition and an obligation to hurt them. Still, when the ego is involved, that is what occurs. I'm from Paterson, New Jersey, and for several decades, Paterson had a reputation for having great boxers and street fighters with excellent boxing skills. Many Pattersonians had natural boxing abilities, but most learned boxing skills from parents, siblings, relatives, and friends. That's the nature versus nurture dynamic. Regarding the nature versus nurture dynamic, I mentioned above that ego defense mechanisms are adopted through unconscious conditioning, so determining if that is nature or nurture is challenging. Still, what is simple and clear cut is that there's a prominent nurture aspect of ego defense mechanisms because it is so widespread among us. Similar to the way many Pattersonians learn boxing skills, the greater society learned ego defense mechanisms from parents, siblings, relatives, and friends. Everybody has developed the skill to be disrespectful and insulting when challenged or contradicted during debates. You can scroll through the different social media venues and observe the dialogues. Take notice of the ratio of disrespectful, insulting, and violent exchanges versus respectful, nonviolent exchanges without insults. Make your prediction before you start, and if you predict a wide disparity with the violent exchanges in the majority, unfortunately, your prediction will be correct. Next essay, Counterpunching and Ego Defense Mechanisms. The sport of boxing is popularly known as the sweet science. One of the most intimidating aspects of the sweet science is the art of counterpunching. There are two ways to execute counterpunching. A fighter can slip or block his opponent's punch attempt and then throw a counterpunch, or a fighter can get hit by his opponent's punch attempt and then throw a counterpunch. The two most important aspects of counterpunching are measuring distance and manipulating timing. Counterpunching is most effective when the opponent is aggressive and attempts many punches. When executing the sweet science, the purpose is to hit your opponent and prevent your opponent from hitting you back. When a fighter successfully manages this aspect of the sweet science, his opponents become extremely confused and intimidated. Their survival instincts usually compel them to stop attempting to land punches because, although they are confused, they realize their problems occur when they try to land punches. Ultimately, they find a way to get out of the fight, which usually ends with a technical knockout or a tap out. During an intellectual debate, understanding the characteristics of ego defense mechanisms to the point where you can convert them into a sweet science and execute them, they take on a similar effect as counterpunching in boxing. Just as in boxing, counterpunching is most effective when the opponent is aggressive and attempts many punches. During an intellectual debate, analyzing and articulating the aspects of ego defense mechanisms your opposition exhibits are most effective when your opposition is aggressive and hurls many insults. In the sweet science of boxing, the purpose is to hit your opponent and prevent your opponent from hitting you back. When executed, the opponent becomes confused, intimidated, and unwilling to throw punches. During an intellectual debate, analyzing and articulating the aspects of ego defense mechanisms as your opposition exhibits them, in essence, intellectually counterpunching, results in the opposition becoming confused, intimidated, and unwilling to continue hurling insults. At that point, they find a way to get out of the debate, which usually ends with a tap out. When I engage in an intellectual debate on social media and the opposition resorts to ego defense mechanisms, especially when they hurl insults, I ignore their insults and remain focused on the topic of discussion. I continue to provide evidence grounded in facts and hopefully truth. I allow the opposition to continue exhibiting ego defense mechanisms, and then I counterpunch with the following excerpt from our sociology syllabus. Subsequently, the opposition recognizes their guilt and then proceeds to tap out. Here's the excerpt. Dear students, in sociology, every topic is on the table for discussion, which means many issues will be controversial. One of the significant learning objectives is to improve students' character. I will introduce students to the characteristics and psychodynamics of ego defense mechanisms, beginning with the definition of cognitive dissonance. I will cover 15 slides of a PowerPoint presentation in this lesson, including most of the 14 subcategories of ego defense mechanisms. The first rule is that no one can say they are right and someone else is wrong. Students are only allowed to agree or disagree respectfully. It is only the ego that demands someone to be right and someone wrong. Students are permitted and encouraged to debate with passion and emotion. However, no one can get emotional, because becoming emotional means resorting to ego defense mechanisms. Ego defense mechanisms are issues of emotional immaturity. So developing emotional maturity achieves the goal of improving character. We will handle hot moments during classroom debates by pointing out the various ego defense mechanisms as students exhibit them, and remind students that resorting to ego defense mechanisms is not permitted because they are issues of emotional immaturity. Also, conflict has positive benefits, and we view problems and mistakes as opportunities for growth, development, and learning instead of something negative that should be avoided. Lastly, students must agree that the ego is banned from debates. Next essay, here's the dialogue. Anonymous ego defense mechanisms. Professor Keys. I maintain that Dave Chappelle reminds me of Malcolm X, but I feel Malcolm is funnier. I appreciate both men and think that it is a tremendous compliment to compare Dave to Malcolm for his analyses on serious issues. Anonymous. I never thought of Malcolm X as being funny. Professor Keys. When your platform is serious, which is the case for social justice activism, whenever you make light of any topic, it has the propensity to be funny. Many social justice activists aren't funny, but due to these dynamics, they often get people to laugh. On the other hand, Malcolm X was hilarious, and he often made people crack the fuck up. A. Peter Belly explained how and why Malcolm had such comedic talent. He said, Malcolm was a mixture of various elements. Malcolm developed a Southern Baptist ideology because his father was a minister. He learned about Garvey's ideology from his parents. He was a farm boy in Michigan, a street hustler and a gangster in Boston and Harlem. Finally, he was a minister in the Nation of Islam. Peter Belly said, when you combine all those ingredients, it results in excellent humor. I found Malcolm to be hilarious from the audio and video cassette tapes I listened to and viewed. Still, I also read where others, like A. Peter Belly, spoke about how funny he was, including two of his close friends, Red Fox and Dick Gregory. I maintain that Malcolm is the funniest comedian I ever heard, but I admit that I'm biased. Malcolm was the master of metaphorical analogies, and that is where he created his funniest material. Anonymous. Huh? What? Your understanding of history is disturbing. How can you discuss Malcolm and not mention Elijah Muhammad in the NOI? I did mention him. Not only is it ahistoric, but it is intellectually dishonest. Malcolm may have had funny moments, but he was far from being a comedian. He was a dynamic orator and social commentator. There is no serious black person grounded in knowledge that will call Malcolm a comedian. Actually, I would like to nominate you for Comedian of the Year for your insane comments. Professor Keys. I agree with your assessment. However, during the many trips I made as a participant in the pilgrimage to Malcolm's grave every year on May 19th, I had conversations with A. Peter Belly, Dr. John Henrik Clarke, Dr. Ben, Herman Ferguson, Professor James Smalls, Grandpa Al Lewis, Sister Jean Reynolds, and countless others I met there who knew Malcolm personally, and they all said that Malcolm was a comedian. They didn't mean it literally. They were describing his penchant for humor, which is what I was doing. Anonymous. It's abundantly clear that you never even read Malcolm's autobiography. Stop embarrassing yourself, bruh. At this point, I explained how much I knew about Malcolm, and then I posted the excerpt from our sociology syllabus. The following is his reply. Anonymous. Who cares about some uninformed random guy bragging about himself on social media? By the way, I deleted your comment. You're trolling now. Professor Keys. The only comment that was deleted was the excerpt from my syllabus, which describes ego defense mechanisms and categorizes them as emotional immaturity. That constitutes a tap out. Thanks for having the audience with me. I hope to see you on the next one. Signing off.